Long before the sun even thought about rising, the medieval monastery was already awake, or at least it pretended to be. The night air rested cold and heavy against thick stone walls that had stood for generations. Inside those walls, time did not move like it did in villages or towns. Here time followed bells. A single deep bell echoed through the cloister, slow and patient, cutting gently through the darkness. The sound rolled across stone corridors, slipped under wooden doors, and settled into the quiet cells where monks slept on narrow beds filled with straw. There was no sudden movement, no rush, no alarm in the modern sense. The bell was expected. It always came. Every night ended this way. A monk opened his eyes in the dimness. The room was small, barely large enough for a bed, a stool, and a rough wooden shelf. The air smelled faintly of stone, wool, and old candles. He did not stretch or linger. He sat up slowly, careful not to make noise. Silence was not just preferred here. Silence was discipline. He pulled a thick wool robe over his shoulders, worn smooth by years of use, and tied it at the waist with a simple rope. The floor beneath his bare feet was cold, reminding him fully that the night still ruled the sky. Outside the cell, the corridor waited, long and narrow, lit only by a few oil lamps that flickered softly. Shadows clung to the arches overhead. One by one, doors opened without sound. Monks stepped into the hallway, heads lowered, eyes calm, faces shaped by routine rather than emotion. No one spoke. No one needed to. Each man knew where to go. They had done this thousands of times before. The monastery itself seemed to breathe slowly in the darkness. Thick stone walls kept out the wind, but the chill still found its way inside. As the monks moved, their footsteps were quiet, almost respectful, as if the building itself was something alive that should not be disturbed. They passed the cloister garden, now hidden under darkness, where herbs grew during warmer months. Tonight it was only shapes and shadows, damp earth and stone paths glistening faintly with moisture. The chapel doors stood open. Inside, rows of wooden benches waited in perfect order. Candles burned at the altar, their small flames trembling gently, casting soft light onto painted walls and carved stone. The monks took their places, standing side by side, forming a silent line of dark robes. When the final bell faded away, another sound took its place. A voice, low and calm, began the first prayer of the day. The words were Latin, slow and measured, repeated every night, every morning, every season. The sound filled the chapel evenly, not loud, not quiet, but steady. For the monks, these words were as familiar as breathing. They did not rush through them, nor did they linger. Each phrase moved at the same careful pace, designed not to excite the mind, but to settle it. Outside, the world slept. Inside, the monastery followed its ancient rhythm. Hours before dawn, this prayer marked the true beginning of the day. Sleep was already finished. The body accepted this as normal. Over time, the monks no longer questioned it. Their days were not shaped by personal choice, but by rule. Every hour had a purpose. Every action followed instruction written long before any of them were born. When the prayer ended, there was no applause, no signal of completion. The monks bowed their heads, then turned and left in silence. Some returned briefly to their cells, others moved directly toward work areas. A few were assigned to copy manuscripts, their tired eyes soon adjusting to candlelight. Others would prepare the kitchen fires, striking sparks carefully, coaxing flames into life. There was no breakfast yet. Food came later. Discipline came first. In the scriptorium, a long room lined with desks, candles burned low. The air smelled of ink and parchment. A monk sat down and unrolled a sheet of animal skin, smooth and pale. He dipped his quill into ink made from oak galls and soot, then began to write. Each letter was slow, deliberate, perfect. There was no rush. Mistakes meant starting again. This work demanded patience above all else. Outside, generations would rise and fall. Inside, letters formed words that would outlast them all. Elsewhere in the monastery, another monk swept the stone floors with a simple broom. Dust lifted briefly, then settled again. The motion was slow and steady, matching the calm pace of the entire place. There was no reward for finishing early. The work itself was the purpose. Even the animals sensed this stillness. A cat moved quietly along a wall, its paws making no sound, its presence almost unnoticed. As the night slowly thinned, the sky outside shifted from deep black to a softer shade of blue. The first hint of morning crept in through narrow windows. The monastery did not change its pace. It never did. Dawn was simply another moment, another bell, another prayer waiting its turn. For the monks, this life was not harsh. It was ordered. The rules removed uncertainty. Each day followed the same path, each night closed the same way. In a world filled with hunger, war, disease, and noise, the monastery offered something rare: predictability, safety, quiet. As the second bell rang, calling them again to prayer, the monks moved once more through stone corridors. The rhythm continued, unchanged, unbroken. Outside, roosters would soon crow. Villages would wake, fields would fill with movement. But inside these walls, the night and the day blended into one long, gentle flow, steady and calm, like breathing itself. And so the monastery welcomed another day, not with excitement, not with ambition, but with routine. The same routine that had carried countless men through countless nights. The same routine that would continue long after this one night quietly faded into memory. After the early prayers faded into the stone walls, the monastery did not suddenly come alive. There was no chatter, no greeting, no casual movement. Silence returned immediately, thick and steady, like another layer of the building itself. This silence was not accidental. It was chosen, trained, and enforced. In a medieval monastery, silence was not emptiness. Silence was work. The monks moved through their duties without speaking. If a message needed to be shared, it was done with a nod, a gesture, or a brief look. Over time, words became unnecessary. Each man learned to read the smallest movements of others. A raised hand meant wait. A lowered head meant follow. Silence sharpened attention. It made every sound stand out: the scrape of wood on stone, the soft rustle of fabric, the distant creak of beams settling in the cold air. In the refectory, long wooden tables stood in perfect rows. Benches were pushed neatly beneath them. Bowls and cups waited, clean and empty. When the time came for the first meal, the monks entered slowly and took their places without sound. They did not choose where to sit. Each seat was assigned. Nothing here was left to personal preference. Even hunger followed rules. Before eating, another prayer filled the room. One monk read aloud from a religious text, his voice low and steady, echoing softly off the walls. The others listened in silence as they ate simple food. Bread, rough and dense. A thin soup made from vegetables and grains. Water, sometimes weak ale. No seasoning beyond salt. No second servings unless allowed. The purpose of the meal was not pleasure, it was fuel. Chewing was slow. Movements were careful. Even the sound of eating was kept to a minimum. A dropped spoon would draw quiet attention, not judgment but awareness. Everything mattered here, even mistakes, especially mistakes. After the meal, the monks stood together and bowed their heads once more. No one lingered. There was always another task waiting. Silence followed them back into the corridors as naturally as shadows. Some monks returned to the scriptorium. Others were assigned to the fields beyond the walls. Their silence changed shape. The open air carried sound farther. Birds called softly. Wind brushed against leaves. Tools met soil with dull, repetitive rhythm. Even here, speaking was limited. Work became a form of prayer. Each motion repeated, predictable, calming. A monk bent over rows of vegetables, pulling weeds slowly, carefully, placing them aside. His hands were rough from years of labor. Dirt pressed under his fingernails. The smell of earth rose gently around him. This was not considered low work. It was holy work. To care for land was to follow God's order, to maintain balance in a world that often lacked it. Inside the monastery, another monk polished metal candlesticks. His cloth moved in slow circles, removing wax drips and soot stains. The task required no thought beyond patience. It allowed the mind to settle. Silence made space for reflection, but not imagination. Imagination was dangerous. It could lead to desire, to distraction, to doubt. Rules governed everything. when to wake, when to eat, when to pray, when to work, when to sleep. Even thoughts were meant to follow structure. Questioning was allowed only within safe boundaries. Obedience was considered freedom. By surrendering choice, the monks believed they surrendered chaos. As the day moved forward, bells marked each transition. The bell did not ask, it commanded. When it rang, hands stopped, heads lifted, feet turned toward the next place. The sound was steady, familiar, comforting. It removed uncertainty. No monk ever wondered what time it was, the bell always knew. In moments between tasks, monks walked the cloister paths. Stone columns lined the covered walkways. The garden at the center offered a quiet view of grass, herbs, and a single tree. These walks were slow and measured. Eyes stayed low. The purpose was movement, not observation. Even beauty was taken carefully, never indulgently. Silence also served another role. It hid fear. Medieval life outside the monastery was loud with danger. Disease, hunger, violence, sudden death. Inside these walls, silence softened those threats. News arrived slowly, if at all. Kings rose and fell beyond the gates. Wars passed like distant storms. The monastery remained still. As afternoon approached, fatigue settled gently into the body. There was no complaint. Tiredness was expected. Comfort was not. The monks accepted this without resistance. Each ache, each cold breeze, each empty hunger was part of discipline. Suffering was not avoided, it was understood. Another prayer gathered them in the chapel. Candlelight danced faintly on stone faces carved long ago. The monks' voices rose and fell together, calm and controlled. The rhythm never changed. That sameness was the point. It dulled sharp edges of thought. It eased the mind toward rest. When the prayer ended, silence returned again, as if it had only stepped aside politely. The monks dispersed, shadows moving along stone walls. Outside, the sun lowered slowly, light shifting across the land. Inside, nothing hurried to meet it. As evening approached, the monastery prepared for night. Lamps were checked, doors secured, animals brought inside. Final tasks completed. The world beyond the walls would soon grow unpredictable again. Darkness always carried risk, but within these walls, darkness was planned. Silence deepened as the final bell approached. It carried with it the promise of rest, not freedom, but pause. Another day nearly complete, shaped entirely by routine, wrapped in stone and discipline. And as the bell finally rang, calling the monks once more to prayer, the monastery settled into itself. Silence did not mean absence. It meant control. It meant order. It meant that here, in this quiet place, the noise of the world could not reach them. The night would come gently, just as it always did. As the day moved deeper into afternoon, prayer continued to shape every moment inside the monastery. Prayer was not something done once or twice. It was the backbone of the entire day. The monks did not pray when they felt like it. They prayed because time itself demanded it. The chapel became the most familiar place of all. Stone floors worn smooth by centuries of feet reflected faint candlelight. Wooden benches stood hard and narrow, offering no comfort. Comfort was never the goal. Attention was. The monks entered quietly, already knowing where to stand. No one searched for a place. Habit guided the body before thought could interfere. The prayers followed a strict order. Psalms were chanted in a steady rhythm, neither fast nor slow. The pace was chosen carefully. Too fast and the mind would rush. Too slow and thoughts might wander. The voices blended into one sound, rising and falling like controlled breathing. Individual voices disappeared. Only the group remained. Some monks closed their eyes while chanting. Others kept them open, fixed on the altar or the stone wall behind it. Both were allowed. What mattered was focus. The words were familiar, repeated daily, sometimes many times a day. They were memorized long ago. No effort was spent recalling them. That allowed the mind to stay calm, almost empty. Hours of prayer were divided across the day and night. In medieval monasteries, there were fixed prayer times known as the divine hours. Each one marked a moment when the monks paused everything else. No task was more important. Work stopped. Silence fell. Prayer began. Standing for long periods was common. Kneeling followed, then standing again. The body learned endurance. Legs ached quietly, back stiffened, but no one shifted or complained. Pain was expected. It was considered part of devotion. Endurance proved discipline. Candles burned steadily, their flames small and controlled. Wax dripped slowly onto metal holders, hardening as it cooled. The smell of melted wax mixed with cold stone and faint smoke. This smell became comforting over time. It meant prayer. It meant order. The chapel windows were narrow and high. Light entered in thin streams, never bright, never warm. Shadows filled the corners. Faces appeared half-lit, half-hidden. The effect was calming. Nothing here demanded attention. Everything encouraged stillness. When prayers ended, the monks did not relax. There was no release, no sense of completion. Prayer flowed into work, and work flowed back into prayer. The two were not separate. Copying manuscripts, tending fields, cleaning floors, all were considered extensions of devotion. In the scriptorium, prayer took a different form. Monks bent over desks, copying sacred texts by hand. The room was silent except for the faint scratch of quills against parchment. Each letter mattered. A single mistake meant scraping ink away carefully, thinning the parchment beneath. Errors were slow and costly. The work required intense focus. Eyes strained in dim light, fingers cramped, ink stained skin permanently, but the task was sacred. Through copying texts, monks believed they preserved truth itself. Their handwriting became a form of prayer, each stroke deliberate, controlled, calm. Time moved slowly here. A single page could take hours. Days passed measured not by pages finished, but by lines completed correctly. Speed was discouraged. Care was everything. Occasionally a monk would pause, lift his eyes briefly, then return to work. That pause was not rest. It was correction. A moment to realign thought, to clear the mind before continuing. Back in the chapel, prayers resumed as evening approached. The sound of voices grew softer, slower. Fatigue settled into bodies like a heavy blanket, but the rhythm remained unchanged. Tiredness did not excuse variation. Consistency was the discipline. Some monks struggled silently. Long prayers tested concentration. Minds drifted despite training. When that happened, monks were taught not to panic. Distraction was corrected gently, brought back with steady repetition. Harsh self-judgment was discouraged. Calm correction was preferred. Outside the monastery walls, the world continued. Merchants shouted. Animals cried. Weather shifted unpredictably. Inside, prayer absorbed all of that chaos and softened it. The walls did more than block sound. They blocked urgency. As darkness approached, the final prayers of the day prepared the monastery for night. Lamps were lit. Shadows deepened. Voices lowered further. The words became almost whispers, though still perfectly timed. The last prayer did not signal freedom. It signaled restraint. Silence followed, heavier than before. From this point on, speech was forbidden unless absolutely necessary. The monks returned to their sleeping quarters slowly, each step measured. Prayer had shaped the day from beginning to end. It ordered time. It controlled thought. It quieted fear. And as the monks lay down on narrow beds, fully clothed, heads resting on wooden pillows or folded cloth, prayer continued quietly in the mind, slowing breath, easing tension. The monastery settled again into stillness. Prayer had done its work. The night was ready. As evening slowly settled over the monastery, the rhythm of the day began to soften. The light outside faded behind thick stone walls, and inside the monks prepared for their final meal. This meal was never large and never exciting. It existed only to sustain the body, nothing more. The refectory filled quietly as monks entered one by one. Long wooden tables stretched across the room, worn smooth by years of use. benches waited in silence. Each monk took his assigned place without hesitation. There was no choosing, no preference, no conversation. Order ruled even hunger. Candles provided the only light. Their small flames flickered gently, casting soft shadows across stone walls. The air smelled faintly of wax, wood, and boiled vegetables. The smell was familiar and comforting, not inviting, but expected. Before anyone ate, a monk stood at a lectern and began to read aloud. His voice was calm, steady and low. The words came from a religious text, read slowly so they could be absorbed without effort. The others listened in silence. Eating and listening happened together. No monk looked up. No monk reacted. The food was simple: thick bread made from coarse grain, a bowl of thin soup made from lentils, onions, or whatever vegetables were available, sometimes cheese, rarely meat. Portions were small, enough to continue work, never enough to feel full. Hands moved slowly. Chewing was quiet. Even swallowing felt deliberate. The goal was not enjoyment. The goal was control. Pleasure was considered a distraction. Hunger was something to be managed, not satisfied. The benches were hard. Sitting offered no comfort. This was intentional. Comfort encouraged lingering. Lingering led to idleness. The monks ate steadily, without pause, without rush. If someone dropped a piece of bread, it was picked up calmly and eaten. Waste was not allowed. Every resource had value. Outside these walls, people starved. Inside, discipline prevented excess. The reading continued throughout the meal. Stories of saints, teachings, reflections on humility and obedience. The voice never changed pace. It never became emotional. Emotion was discouraged. Calm attention was the goal. When the bowls were empty, no one asked for more. The monk reading finished his passage. A short prayer followed. Heads bowed. The meal ended as quietly as it began. The monk stood and exited the refectory in silence. Dishes were collected and washed immediately. Water splashed softly in stone basins. The sound echoed briefly, then faded. As darkness deepened, the monastery prepared fully for night. Doors were checked. Fires were reduced to glowing embers. Lamps were placed carefully to last through the hours ahead. Nothing was left to chance. Outside, the wind moved gently. Inside, the air remained still. The thick walls held warmth and quiet together. The world beyond the monastery faded further away. The monks returned to the chapel one final time. Evening prayers were shorter, softer, slower. Voices barely rose above whispers. Fatigue settled into bodies naturally. The day had been long, structured, unchanging. After the final prayer, silence became absolute. This was the great silence. From this moment until morning, speaking was forbidden. Even gestures were limited. The monastery entered its deepest calm. Monks walked back to their cells with slow steps. Candles guided the way. Shadows stretched across stone floors. Each door closed gently behind its owner. Inside the cell, the monk removed his outer robe and folded it carefully. He lay down on the narrow bed, fully clothed, blanket pulled close. The room was cold but familiar. The body accepted it. Breathing slowed, thoughts faded. The rules of the day loosened their hold as sleep approached. There was no reflection on what had been done, no planning for tomorrow. Tomorrow would arrive with the bell. The monastery settled fully into night. Stone, wood, and silence held everything together. Outside, darkness ruled the land. Inside, routine ruled the mind. And as the monks drifted into rest, the monastery remained awake in its own way, steady, disciplined, and calm, waiting patiently for the next bell to begin everything again. As the monastery moved deeper into the night, the monks rested inside their small stone cells. These rooms were never meant to feel comfortable. They were meant to feel simple, controlled, and quiet. Each cell was nearly identical, with thick stone walls, a narrow wooden bed, a rough blanket, and very little else. Nothing here distracted the mind. The stone held the cold even after the day had passed. The air felt heavy and still. Breath moved slowly in the dim space, rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The monks lay on their backs or sides, bodies still dressed, ready to rise at the next bell without delay. There were no windows large enough to see the outside world clearly. Only narrow slits allowed a faint hint of night air and distant light to enter. Shadows rested along the walls, unmoving. The darkness felt calm rather than threatening. Silence ruled these hours completely. The great silence allowed no speaking, no whispers, no unnecessary movement. Even coughing was suppressed if possible. The discipline of quiet was strongest at night. Sound could disturb not only others, but the order itself. Beds were hard by design, wooden frames pressed against the body. Straw shifted softly beneath weight. Comfort was not expected. The monks believed that too much comfort weakened discipline. Sleep was allowed, but indulgence was not. Despite this, rest came easily. The body was tired from routine. The mind had been guided all day by structure and repetition. There was little left to think about. Thoughts slowed naturally, slipping away without resistance. Occasionally, a monk turned slightly, adjusting the blanket. The movement was slow and careful. The sound barely reached the stone walls. The monastery remained still. The corridors outside the cells were dark. Lamps burned low at distant intervals. Their faint glow reflected off stone floors, creating long, soft shadows that did not move. The building felt ancient and patient, as if it had witnessed countless nights like this before. Cold air moved gently through the monastery, guided by hidden draughts between stones. It touched faces and hands lightly, reminding the monks of their surroundings. This cold was accepted, endured. It sharpened awareness without causing alarm. Sleep in the monastery was not deep at first. It was light and controlled. The monks trained themselves to remain partly alert. This allowed them to rise quickly when called. Over time, the body learned this balance naturally. Breathing slowed further. Muscles relaxed. The rhythm of the day finally released its grip. The bell had not yet rung again, and until it did, nothing was required. Outside the walls, the world remained unpredictable. Inside, everything was ordered. The monastery did not sleep the way villages slept. It rested in stages, always prepared to wake. Some monks dreamed quietly. Others did not dream at all. Both were acceptable. Dreams were not discussed. The inner life was private, shaped by prayer and silence. The night continued without interruption. No footsteps echoed. No voices broke the calm. Only the quiet presence of stone, wood, and resting bodies filled the space. As hours passed, the monastery held itself together through discipline rather than locks. Trust in routine replaced fear. The monks slept knowing exactly what would come next. And in these cold stone cells, wrapped in darkness and silence, the monastery rested gently, waiting for the bell that would once again guide every movement, every thought, and every breath back into order. In the deepest part of the night, when sleep felt steady and complete, the monastery did not remain still. The silence was broken gently, not by noise but by purpose. A single bell rang through the stone corridors, low and slow, echoing softly through walls that had learned this sound by heart. This was the midnight bell. The monks did not wake in surprise. Their bodies responded calmly, almost automatically. Eyes opened slowly in the dark cells. Breathing adjusted. Sleep released its hold without resistance. This interruption was expected. It had always been part of the night. One by one, monks sat up on their narrow beds. Blankets were folded carefully. Feet touched the cold stone floor. The chill felt sharper now, but it was familiar. There was no hesitation, no lingering. Discipline guided every movement. Robes were pulled on quietly. Knots were tied by memory rather than sight. Candles were not needed inside the cells. The monks knew their surroundings perfectly. Darkness did not confuse them. Cell doors opened gently. corridors filled again with slow movement. Shadows shifted as figures passed beneath low lamps. No one spoke, no one hurried. The rhythm was slow, steady, and controlled. The night air inside the monastery felt heavier now, colder. Breathing produced faint clouds that faded quickly. Stone walls absorbed sound, keeping everything calm and contained. The monks moved toward the chapel once more. Their steps echoed softly, never sharp, never sudden. Each step felt deliberate, measured, balanced. Sleep still lingered in their bodies, but duty guided them forward. Inside the chapel, candles were already lit. Their flames glowed steadily, illuminating carved stone and painted surfaces that seemed older in the low light. The monks took their places without confusion. The familiar order returned immediately. Midnight prayers began without announcement. Voices rose slowly, blending together into a single calm sound. The pace was slower than earlier prayers. The night demanded softness. Words moved gently through the space, never pushing, never pulling attention sharply. Standing after waking was not easy. Muscles felt heavy, legs stiffened slightly, but the body adapted. Endurance replaced comfort. The discipline of rising at night was considered essential. It reminded the monks that their lives were not their own. Eyes remained half open or closed. Focus stayed inward. The chapel felt suspended in time. Outside, the world was dark and silent. Inside, the rhythm of prayer continued as it had for centuries. The prayers did not last long. They were meant to mark the night, not dominate it. When they ended, the monks bowed their heads briefly, then turned and left in the same calm order they had arrived. Returning to their cells felt easier now. The body was awake just enough. Sleep would come again soon. Corridors emptied quietly, doors closed softly. Inside the cells, monks lay down once more. Blankets were pulled close. Breathing slowed gradually. The body remembered rest. The midnight bell had done its work. It reminded the monastery that time continued even in darkness, that order remained even during sleep, that discipline never fully rested. As silence returned, deeper than before, the monastery settled again. Sleep reclaimed the monks gently. The cold stone walls held everything steady. And so the night continued, marked by bells and silence, resting quietly within the ancient rhythm that shaped every hour, every breath, and every life inside the medieval monastery. After the midnight prayers ended, the monastery did not fall immediately into complete rest. A quiet period followed, one that existed between waking and sleeping. During this time, the monks moved slowly through familiar spaces, guided not by light but by memory. The corridors were dim, lit only by a few oil lamps placed far apart. Their small flames barely reached the stone walls, leaving much of the space in shadow. The monks did not mind this darkness. They had walked these paths countless times. Every turn, every step, every doorway was already known. Footsteps echoed softly, never rushed, never sharp. Each monk moved at his own steady pace. No one passed another. No one stopped to wait. The rhythm remained even and calm. Some monks were assigned simple tasks during these hours, checking doors, adjusting lamps, making sure fires burned low and safely. These duties were performed quietly, without thought or conversation. The work was light but important. Order had to be maintained even at night. In the cloister, the open courtyard lay dark beneath the sky. Stars were faintly visible above the stone arches. Cold air rested heavily over the ground. The garden slept quietly, herbs and soil covered in shadow. No sound came from this space except the soft movement of wind. A monk walked slowly along the covered path, hands folded inside his sleeves. His breath moved steadily. His eyes stayed lowered. There was nothing to look for, nothing to discover. The purpose was simply to walk. Walking through darkness was considered an exercise in discipline. It required trust in memory, trust in routine, trust that the path would always be there. Fear was discouraged. Darkness was not an enemy. It was simply another condition to accept. Inside the monastery, stone absorbed warmth slowly. Walls felt cold to the touch. Pillars rose silently into shadow. The building seemed larger at night, emptier, more still. Yet it never felt abandoned. The presence of routine filled every space. As monks completed their assigned tasks, they returned quietly to their cells. Doors closed softly. The sound faded quickly into silence. Lamps were left burning just enough to guide movement if needed. Nothing was left bright. The night settled again, deeper this time. Sleep returned more easily after the interruption of prayer and movement. Bodies relaxed, muscles loosened, the rhythm of breathing slowed further. The monastery held itself steady in the darkness. No part of it was awake or asleep completely. It existed in balance, always ready, always controlled. Outside, the world beyond the walls lay silent and unknown. Inside, every sound, every movement, every pause followed a familiar pattern. This predictability brought comfort. As the hours passed, the darkness remained gentle. Nothing demanded attention. Nothing required change. The monks rested quietly, knowing the bell would return when it was time. Until then, the monastery remained wrapped in shadow, stone and silence holding everything together, allowing the night to continue its slow, peaceful passage. As the night moved forward and the hours passed silently, the monastery remained calm but never careless. Even in deep darkness, the order of the place continued. A small number of monks stayed lightly awake, not fully resting, not fully active, existing in a state of quiet awareness. This was the night watch, simple, slow, and unremarkable. The watch did not involve patrolling with weapons or searching for danger. Danger rarely reached these walls. Instead, the watch meant listening. Listening for unusual sounds, listening for changes in the wind, listening for the building itself. Stone can speak in subtle ways, a crack settling, a door shifting, a flame burning too low or too high. A monk walked slowly through the corridors, holding a small lantern low to the ground. Its light barely reached his feet. The rest of the hallway remained in shadow. This was intentional. Bright light disturbed rest. Darkness preserved it. Each step was measured. The monk paused at familiar points, checking doors with a gentle touch, adjusting a lamp wick slightly, making sure embers in the hearth glowed safely. No task took long. No movement was wasted. In the chapel, candles burned quietly. Their flames were steady, undisturbed by wind. The air felt heavy with stillness. The altar stood unchanged, waiting for the morning prayers. The monk bowed his head briefly, not stopping for long, then continued on. Outside the walls, night animals moved unseen. A distant owl called softly. Wind brushed against stone. These sounds did not enter the monastery fully. The walls filtered them, leaving only faint echoes. Inside, the sleeping monks breathed steadily. The sound was barely noticeable, a soft background rhythm that blended with the quiet. Each cell remained closed. No one stirred unnecessarily. The night watch did not feel important or heroic. It was routine, another responsibility carried out without thought. Its value lay in consistency rather than action. Time moved slowly. There was no way to measure it except by feeling. The body sensed when the deepest part of night had arrived. The cold felt slightly sharper. The silence felt heavier. The monk on watch paused near a window slit. A faint blue darkness rested outside. The sky showed no sign of dawn yet. This was the longest stretch of night, when the world seemed suspended. Satisfied that everything remained in order, the monk returned the lantern to its place. He moved back toward his cell quietly, allowing the building to return fully to rest. Lying down again, he did not fall immediately into deep sleep. His mind remained calm and clear, drifting slowly. This light rest was enough. The bell would call again soon. The monastery settled once more. Every stone, every beam, every resting body held steady. Nothing changed. Nothing needed to change. The quiet watch of the night faded back into complete stillness. The hours continued to pass unnoticed, carrying the monastery gently toward morning, wrapped in routine, discipline, and calm silence. As the longest hours of night quietly passed, the monastery began to sense a change, even before light appeared. The air felt slightly different, less heavy, less still. Nothing moved faster. Nothing changed suddenly. The shift was gentle and almost unnoticed. Inside the stone cells, monks continued to rest lightly. Sleep came and went in calm waves. Bodies remained relaxed, ready to respond when needed. Breathing stayed slow and even. The cold softened just enough to be felt rather than resisted. In the corridors, the darkness remained deep, but shadows lost a small amount of weight. Lamps burned steadily, their flames calm and controlled. Stone walls reflected faint hints of movement that came not from people, but from time itself. Outside the monastery, the sky began its slow transformation. Black faded into deep blue. Stars dimmed gradually. The world did not wake yet, it only prepared. Inside, the monastery remained disciplined. No monk rose early. No one anticipated the bell. Waiting was part of the rule. The bell would decide the moment. It always did. In the chapel, candles continued to burn quietly. Wax gathered slowly at their bases. The altar stood unchanged. Nothing here reacted to dawn. The routine did not bend for light. A monk stirred slightly in his cell, adjusting his position. The movement was small and controlled. Rest returned easily. The body trusted the rhythm completely. As time moved forward, faint light touched the highest windows. It slipped in carefully, resting on stone without brightness. The monastery accepted it without response. Outside, birds began to shift softly. The sound barely reached the walls. The world beyond started its own cycle. Inside, the monastery waited. The bell had not yet rung. That silence mattered. It allowed the final moments of night to exist fully. No interruption, no urgency. Monks remained still. Minds remained quiet. Discipline held everything together. Dawn was not an event here. It was simply another phase. When the sky grew lighter, the monastery did not change. The bell still controlled the moment. Light did not command action. Routine did. The cold air moved gently through narrow spaces, carrying the faint promise of morning. Stone released warmth slowly. The building seemed to stretch inward, preparing for movement. Finally, the air felt ready. Not bright, not warm, just ready. And as the monastery held its breath, waiting calmly, the bell prepared to speak again, getting the monks out of night and into another carefully ordered day, exactly as it had done for centuries. When the bell finally rang, it did not sound urgent or loud. It moved through the monastery slowly, filling stone corridors with a familiar tone that had guided countless mornings before. The sound was steady and calm, never sharp. It did not demand attention. It invited obedience. Inside the cells, monks opened their eyes quietly. There was no surprise. The bell arrived exactly when expected. Sleep released its hold without resistance. Bodies responded gently, trained by years of repetition. Monks sat up on their narrow beds and folded their blankets carefully. Each movement followed habit rather than thought. Feet touched the cold stone floor once more. The chill was familiar, no longer something to resist. Robes were pulled on. Knots were tied by memory. Faces remained calm, expressionless, shaped by routine rather than emotion. No one rushed. There was no advantage in speed. Order mattered more than time. Cell doors opened softly. Corridors filled again with slow movement. Lamps still burned low, their light mixing gently with the pale glow entering through narrow windows. Night and morning overlapped briefly, sharing the space without conflict. The monks walked toward the chapel in silence. Steps echoed faintly, evenly. Each footstep matched the next. The rhythm of the monastery returned fully, steady, and controlled. Inside the chapel, candles remained lit. Morning light touched the stone walls carefully, never bright enough to disrupt calm. The monks took their places as they always did. Nothing had changed. The morning prayers began. Voices rose together, low and measured. The sound was familiar, comforting, unchanging. Words flowed easily, shaped by memory rather than effort. The prayer did not energize, it centered. Standing felt easier now. Bodies adjusted. Fatigue faded into routine. The day began without excitement, without anticipation. It began simply because the bell had said so. Outside the monastery walls, the world was waking quickly. Villages stirred, fields prepared for labor. Noise returned to ordinary life. Inside, none of that mattered. The monastery remained sealed from urgency. Time moved at its own pace. The bell, not the sun, defined the day. When the prayer ended, the monks bowed their heads and turned away in silence. Work would follow. Meals would come later. Prayer would return again and again. The night had passed completely now. The monastery did not mark it as an achievement. It was simply another completed cycle. As monks moved back into their duties, the stone walls held onto the quiet of night, preserving it even as daylight grew stronger. The rhythm continued, uninterrupted. And so the monastery entered another day, guided by bells, shaped by silence, and held together by routine, exactly as it had been for centuries, calm, ordered, and unchanged. After the first prayers of morning ended, the monastery did not pause to reflect on the night that had passed. It moved forward calmly, exactly as planned. The transition from night to day was smooth and uneventful, guided entirely by habit. Monks left the chapel quietly and returned to their assigned duties. Some moved toward the scriptorium, others toward storage rooms, kitchens, or the fields beyond the walls. No instructions were spoken. Everyone already knew where to go. Routine removed the need for discussion. Morning air entered the monastery slowly through narrow windows. It carried a faint freshness, cool but no longer sharp. The stone walls released a small amount of warmth gathered from bodies and lamps during the night. The building adjusted gently, as it always did. In the scriptorium, desks were prepared again. Candles were replaced where needed. Parchment lay ready. Ink pots were checked carefully. Monks took their seats without sound and began their work. Quills touched parchment with familiar softness. Letters formed slowly, evenly, without haste. The work demanded patience rather than strength. Eyes followed each line carefully. Hands moved with control. A mistake meant correction, not frustration. Time did not matter here. Accuracy mattered more. Elsewhere, monks prepared simple tools for outdoor work. Doors opened quietly. The courtyard garden appeared again in soft morning light. Plants stood still, covered lightly in dew. The smell of earth returned gently. Monks stepped outside and began their labor without delay. Soil was turned slowly. Plants were checked carefully. Movements remained calm and deliberate. Work followed the same steady pace as prayer. Inside the monastery, others cleaned floors and benches. Brooms moved in slow strokes across stone. Dust lifted briefly, then settled. Water was carried carefully, poured gently, never spilled. The monastery remained quiet, even during activity. Sounds existed, but they were soft and predictable. Nothing startled, nothing distracted. As the morning continued, hunger returned naturally. It was not urgent, it was expected. The monks did not rush toward food. The bell would announce the time when eating was allowed. Until then, work continued. The memory of night faded completely. There was no discussion of sleep, of dreams, of cold or discomfort. Those things belonged to routine, not conversation. Outside the walls, the world moved quickly now. Voices rose, animals called, tools struck hard surfaces. Life demanded attention. Inside the monastery, demands were fewer and clearer. The rhythm of the day strengthened as hours passed. Prayer returned again, marking another pause. Work followed again. Silence remained constant. The monastery did not look backward or forward. It existed entirely within the present structure. Each moment matched the one before it closely enough to feel familiar, yet necessary. The night had served its purpose. It had provided rest, discipline, and balance. Now the day continued, carrying the same calm forward. And as monks moved steadily through another morning, the monastery held its form, unchanged and untroubled, allowing time to pass without resistance, one quiet hour at a time. As the day continued quietly inside the monastery, nothing felt new and nothing felt finished. Each hour blended smoothly into the next, shaped by the same rules that had guided the night. Change was rare here. Consistency was everything. The monks moved through their duties with calm precision. The same paths were walked again and again. The same doors opened and closed. The same tools were used in the same way. Over time, the body learned these movements so well that thought was no longer needed. This sameness was not considered dull or empty. It was considered safe. In a world filled with uncertainty, repetition brought peace. The monks did not wonder what tomorrow might bring. Tomorrow would bring the same bell, the same prayer, the same work. Meals arrived exactly when expected. Prayer followed again, steady and unchanging. Work resumed quietly. Each moment fit neatly into the structure created long before these monks had arrived. The monastery itself seemed untouched by time. Stone walls weathered slowly. Wooden beams darkened gradually. Floors wore smooth under countless footsteps. Nothing hurried toward decay. Everything aged patiently. Monks aged the same way. Hair thinned, backs bent slightly. Movements slowed, but routine remained. Older monks walked the same paths they had walked as young men. Experience deepened discipline rather than weakening it. No one here chased achievement. There were no goals to reach, no milestones to celebrate. Success meant obedience. Completion meant continuation. Outside the monastery, kingdoms rose and fell. Borders shifted. Wars began and ended. Inside, bells continued to ring at the same hours, indifferent to politics and power. This separation from the outside world was intentional. News arrived rarely and slowly. When it did, it changed nothing. The monastery existed to remain unchanged. Silence continued to protect the rhythm. Without constant noise, thoughts softened. Without choice, doubt faded. The structure held everything together gently. As afternoon moved toward evening once more, the cycle prepared to repeat. Lamps would be lit again. Meals would grow simpler. Prayer would slow further. Sleep would return in stages. The monks did not think of this as repetition. They thought of it as order. Each day confirmed the one before it. Each night reset the body and mind. In this way, life inside the monastery felt suspended. Time passed, but it left little trace. Days did not stand apart. They flowed together quietly. And as the monks continued moving through this carefully shaped existence, the monastery remained what it had always been, a place where change slowed, noise faded, and life followed the same calm path, over and over again, without urgency, without interruption, and without end. As the day inside the monastery continues quietly, there is nothing left to explain and nothing left to expect. The rhythm has already been set. Bells will ring, prayers will return, work will follow, silence will hold everything together. Life here does not rush forward. It does not look back. It simply continues, steady and unchanged. Stone walls will stand. Candles will burn low. Footsteps will echo softly and fade again. The monks will rest tonight just as they did before, calmly, carefully, without urgency. Sleep will come gently, guided by routine rather than comfort. Outside these walls, the world will remain loud and unpredictable. Inside, nothing will demand attention. Nothing will interrupt the order that has shaped every hour. As you listen, there is no need to stay awake. There is nothing more to follow. Let the quiet carry you forward. Let the slow rhythm ease your thoughts. The monastery remains, the silence remains, the routine continues without effort. And as the bells wait patiently for the next hour, you can rest knowing that everything here is exactly as it should be, calm, steady, and unchanged, allowing the night to settle once more, gently and without interruption. Sleep now.